2, 3. Cheers! You want to listen to Angel to speak here? Come here! Come here! Hello, everyone.
Hello.
What an incredible outpouring of support. It means so much to me. So my parents came to this country as immigrants, as many of you did. They met in graduate school at UC Berkeley. Anyone here go to Berkeley? There's always someone.
Used to work there.
Always someone among any significantly sized group of Asians. So my parents met as graduate students at Berkeley. My father was a physicist. My mother was a statistician. And then I was born in upstate New York when my dad started working for GE. Remember when I was a kid, I thought everyone's dad had a PhD. So I went to Phillips Exeter Academy, where I think at least some of you have children now. Went to Brown University for college, studied economics and political science. Didn't know what to do, so I went to law school. Because I am Asian, my parents were like, you only have two choices. So I was a corporate attorney in New York City for 5 months. Thought it was not a great job, and so I left to start a business. How many of you have started a business? At least some of you have, I'm sure. So if you have your hand up, you know it's very, very hard to start a business. And I found out it was very hard, the hard way. My little business failed. So at this point, I owed $100,000 in school loans. My parents still told people I was a lawyer. But then I decided to keep at it. I worked at another startup and then another, and then I became the head of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States and was acquired by a public company in 2009. So at that point, the financial crisis was happening, and it was a tough time for the country. And I thought I had a clue why. I thought one of the reasons why the financial crisis happened was that so many smart, energetic, ambitious people were heading to Wall Street and Silicon Valley and consulting firms, and not places around the country to start businesses. So I quit my job. I donated some money to start a new organization called Venture for America. Started calling rich friends around the country saying, "Do you love America?" The smart among them said, "What does it mean if I say yes?" And then it's just like the things that got you all here today. And then I was like, "Do you love America for $10,000?" And then 12 of them said, "Yes, I do." And I was like, "Great." So I raised about $250,000, started a nonprofit organization. It grew and grew to the point where now thousands of applicants apply to Venture for America every year. We help create several thousand jobs in cities like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, Baltimore. And I was named an ambassador of entrepreneurship by the Obama administration. So I got to bring my wife to meet President Obama. My in-laws liked me very much for about. And so this is what I've been doing for the last 7 years, is helping try and create jobs around the country. And then Donald Trump won the election in 2016, which many of you remember. And many of you voted for Donald Trump, which is fine. But I saw his victory as a terrible sign for the country. I thought this means that tens of millions of Americans were so desperate that we elected a narcissist reality TV star as our president, and that our institutions were going to deteriorate progressively. And when I looked at the numbers, I saw a clear explanation for why he won. That's different from what the press has been saying in the aftermath. So if you watch CNN or these other cable channels, why would you think that Donald Trump won in 2016? Russia is probably number one. Maybe the combination goes something like Russia, the FBI, Facebook, Hillary Clinton, some combination of those things. But the numbers tell a different story. The numbers say that the reason why Donald Trump won is that we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Iowa, And if you look at the data, you see there's a direct line up between the adoption of industrial robots in an area and the movement towards Donald Trump. We're in the midst of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of our country. And for those of you who are Democrats here in Minnesota, Trump came this close to winning Minnesota too. And Minnesota is supposed to be safely blue. No one thought that he would win Minnesota, but then every part of the state that is not Minneapolis, St. Paul went very, very hard for Donald Trump, came this close to winning. Now, why is that? Why is there so much of a movement in that direction? It's because we are blasting away the most common jobs in the economy. We started with these 4 million manufacturing jobs, and I've worked with people in technology for years. How many of y'all work in technology? So if you work in technology, you may know that what we did to the manufacturing jobs, we will now do to the retail jobs, the call center jobs, the fast food jobs, and the truck driving jobs, as well as other white-collar jobs like insurance agents, financial advisors, accounting. A lot of this stuff's getting automated first by robots and then AI. And AI has gone from the hype stage to actually being real. When I spoke to 70 CEOs in New York, I asked how many of you are looking at using AI to get rid of a lot of workers. Every hand went up. And that's because their financial incentives are very clear. If you can sell them AI that's going to replace thousands of workers, then the AI is going to be a sure bet. And this is something that's very important for our community. We have to explain to America it is not immigrants that are causing these problems throughout the economy. It is technology that is displacing more and more workers. And if you go to an American factory, you do not see wall-to-wall immigrants. You see wall-to-wall machines and robot arms and places where humans used to work. So in 2016 and 2017, I saw that we didn't even seem to understand what was happening. We're in the third inning of the fourth industrial revolution, the greatest economic and technological transformation in our history. MIT, Bain, and McKinsey project that we're going to automate away between 20 and 30% of jobs by 2030, which is only 11 years away. And because we don't even understand the set of problems, no one was going to do anything about it. Now, you might have gathered, I was not someone who said, I'm going to grow up to run for president. Again, I'm Asian. But I saw what was happening and that we didn't even understand what was the problem. And so there's never going to be a solution if you don't understand the problem. So I decided to run for president to take this message to the American people and let them know, look, it's not immigrants, it's technology, and we need to start evolving in terms of how we treat our people so that everyone actually feels good about progress. So that is what this campaign's about. Many of you are here because some friend bugged you to be here. It's fine. I'm going to talk a little bit about just the Asian American community. The Asian American community is not traditionally very politically involved. Raise your hand if you're heavily politically involved. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you for having your hand up. This is not unusual for our community. When my parents came here, they were completely politically uninvolved. My parents came here just like many of you came here to create a better life for yourself and your family. This is one reason why many of you voted for Donald Trump, is that Asian Americans tend to be single-issue voters. And what is that issue? Taxes. If you lower my taxes, we are all good, and everything else, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. About half of our community votes on taxes, and that's why we're split, essentially, even down the middle, Republican, Democrat. There are a number of reasons why the Asian American community is not taken very seriously politically. And it's true, we're not taken very seriously politically. Now, number one is because of the number of hands that went up or did not go up. We do not vote at the same levels as other groups. By your being here, you are doing something remarkable. We do not donate money to political candidates or campaigns at the same level as other groups.
We're doing today.
Yes. Raise your hand if this is the first campaign you've ever donated to.
Sorry.
Right? Yeah. Number three, we don't run for office as often as other groups. Number four, we're split politically. Number five, we tend to live in states that we cannot affect politically. That's New York, Massachusetts, Texas, California. We're not going to make them flip from blue to red or red to blue because they're already either clearly blue or clearly red. I joke all the time that if we all moved to New Hampshire, we would become very important very quickly. So that is what I'm going to propose, that we all move to the field. And we do it this year just so we can vote in next year. And I think I have a real leg up. So there are a number of reasons why people don't take us very seriously politically. And I'm going to suggest to you all that we need to wake ourselves up politically, because the days of us coming to this country and making a good living for ourselves and our family and letting everyone else figure everything else out need to end as fast as possible. Because this transformation that we're undergoing, it's increasing tribalism in this country. And if you have a large group of workers that are losing the most common jobs in their society and economy, let's call it truck driving. There are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country. It's the most common job in 29 states. How do you think Americans are going to take it when the trucks start driving themselves and they lose those jobs? You know, they're going to be turning around for answers, and who are the likely scapegoats going to be? So we've started with immigrants. Who's the primary international rival or antagonist right now? China. So you can imagine hostility going up towards China. When's the last time you saw a positive article about China? And when's the last time you saw a negative one? And I talk about the fact that we jailed the CFO of Huawei. Imagine how America would react if China had jailed Sheryl Sandberg while she was in Hong Kong because of something that they had done with Tibet. Like, how would America respond if Sheryl Sandberg were in jail? We would be freaking out every day. Every day the national headline would be like, Sheryl Sandberg's still in jail. Sheryl Sandberg's still in jail. And that's what happened with the CFO of Huawei. She was in Vancouver at a conference, and then the American authorities arrested her. And imagine how people in China felt about that. So the hostilities with China are going up, and we all know that Americans have difficulty distinguishing between Chinese American, and Asian American. And so if we think that we're going to get through this era, this fourth industrial revolution, and just let the politics figure themselves out, it's going to eventually come to our community in ways that are not things that we would welcome. Now, this is an historic chance for our community to actually make our voices heard politically, because number one, we have an Asian American who's the first ever to make the Democratic primary debates, the first in the nation's history in June and July, and that's this guy. So that's opportunity number one. Opportunity number two is that the voting calendar has changed so that states with lots of Asian Americans have actually become more important. So, because you did not raise your hands, so you don't know, but I'm going to have some fun with this, because we like learning. What is the order of primary voting states? Who's the first to vote? Iowa. That's right. Who's number two? New Hampshire. Number three?
California.
Nevada. Number four? South Carolina. And then number five? It's California, it's Texas, it's also Minnesota. You guys are among some of the early voting states, and California did not used to be this high up. California actually got tired of the national election, or the nomination getting decided before we got to California. California used to not be number 5. California used to be much, much further down the list, and so they moved themselves up to number 5. So if you look at this map, Nevada, 12% Asian American, California, 15% Asian American. And how many people are running for president as a Democrat this time around?
20.
Right now the official number is 21. So if you have a very fragmented field, it is not going to be decided by the time it gets to Nevada or California. And so if you have Asian Americans coming out in force for a particular candidate, let's call him Andrew Yang, that can actually swing the whole thing. This is going to be the first time that Asian Americans can actually help determine who's going to be the President of the United States. And you, yeah, that's it. So this is an historic opportunity for us to actually get activated politically, and I'm certainly thrilled to be here with you all because I want to play a role in energizing the Asian American community. I understand that most of us do not think politics is something that we should be investing in, in that way because it seems like it's not a realm that's naturally designed for us. I wrote an email that some of you read last week about the fact that I grew up very introverted, like many of your children. That's true. I just like to read books and play video games. I got stage fright anytime you asked me to speak in public in front of like the classroom. I'd like the last thing I ever wanted to do. And I had to break out of that when I started my own company, because it's very hard to start your own company if you're not willing to talk to people. It's actually very tricky. And so I developed down this road, and Asian Americans historically have said, look, we shouldn't head towards politics. We certainly shouldn't tell our kids to run for office because we think that that's somehow not going to be a realm that we can succeed in. But this country needs us to step up in the biggest way. This country needs us to contribute at the highest levels because for whatever reason, it is not able to understand what is happening to it. And part of that is that very, very few people in politics understand technology, and very few of them understand the economy. They actually got rid of the office that was meant to evaluate technology 25 years ago. So if you have this sneaking sense that Washington, D.C. is behind the times, it is.
Yes.
And it needs us to help determine the path forward. It's not left, it's not right, it's forward. Now, now, there are people in the Asian American community who have said something to me about like, hey, is this our time? And one of the things I've said is, if we wait for someone else to tell us it's our time, it will never be our time. Yes. We have to make it our time. And I'm going to close with a story from my childhood. I came home from school in 5th or 6th grade, and my father was spinning math. So my father is an engineer at IBM. He generated 69 U.S. patents over his career. He came home very, very angry. He worked at the Tom Watson Research Labs in Westchester County. So he came home very angry, and what was he angry about? What he said to me, he said, I'll never forget this. He said, when you can't invent anything anymore at IBM, they make you a manager. And so he said, all we have at IBM is a bunch of white managers and Asian engineers working for them. And he came home and he was very angry. And of course, I don't know whether his perception was what was happening at IBM, but imagine being a 12-year-old boy hearing this and then processing it, being like, wow, like, is dad right? Like, he's certainly very upset about it. There is this sneaking suspicion that I grew up with, that many of you grew up with, that we are somehow a little bit less American than other people. And that we're allowed to become this successful in the society, but we are not allowed to become this successful. And that is something, with your help, that I would love to change. That if we can help make history anyone else, and that we can lead and contribute at the highest possible level. So thank you all very much. Minneapolis, St. Paul, you guys are beautiful. Thank you all. Thank you for supporting me so much to me. And yeah, let's show what we can do. Thank you all very much. I'm happy to take some questions now.
Okay. Well, we wanted to also present SK. Many of us doesn't know SK. SK opened the door for us. We have 200 people all here, and we are all strangers. Andrew Young supporters. So we really appreciate you guys all coming out and donate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You want to say a few words?
I appreciate everyone to come out, and I didn't think our house is big enough for all these people. I'm sorry the food is running low. Down, but we got some refreshment, so hopefully you step up your appetite. Listen to him. Did you eat? Okay. Have you eaten yet?
I'm sure we'll get some food in there.
All right. All right, we're going to take some questions. We got to collect a couple questions before. Andrew is a person who has solutions, unlike Washington, D.C. insiders who talk about problems but doesn't provide solutions. So he's the one who has solutions. You have a question you want to ask?
So I'm very concerned that China is being depicted as an enemy. So how do we address that?
Well, I'm going to go on a limb and say just having an Asian American on that primary debate table would actually help at least influence people's perception of whether like China's the enemy. Because if you have a Chinese American man running for president on that debate stage, you'd be like, oh, look at that. So that's something I'm very proud of. I'm obviously very proud of my heritage, and I'm very proud to represent the community. The big trap to me is that America has a tendency to have a zero-sum game approach, particularly to other rising powers, where if some other country is getting bigger or richer, that it somehow eventually is going to be bad for America. And that's what we have to avoid. And so if you can imagine me in the White House in 2020, 2021, and one of my messages will be like, look, China is not our enemy. And if we treat it like it's our enemy, then it's going to be bad for them, it's going to be bad for us, and that we need to have a growth mindset and not a zero-sum mindset to our relationship with China.
I have a second question here that somebody submitted. There's a younger Andrew Yang, but he couldn't make it today. 13 years old.
He better vote for me.
He better vote in 2 years. And then also the same question that Hubert He. One of your policies is implementing a universal basic care (UBI). It sounds great, but where the money come from? Is it another entitlement program?
Yeah. So if you're here, you've probably heard that my flagship proposal is this freedom dividend of everyone getting $1,000 a month, starting at age 18. So if you're below 18, you have to wait a minute. Now this seems very dramatic, and the first time you saw it, you thought like, wow, what is this? Like, is that a gimmick? Is that for real? But when you dig into the trends, first of all, why are we doing this? We are in the process of automating away the most common jobs in the economy, and it's tearing us apart. And I'll give you a few data points that compelled me to say, okay, that's where we are. The first thing is that our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, first time in 100 years. Now, why has America's life expectancy declined?
Donald Trump.
Suicide.
Well, it helped get Donald Trump elected, but Donald Trump did not cause our... It's opioid crisis. 8 Americans are dying of drugs every hour, and Americans are committing suicide at record levels, particularly middle-aged Americans. Now, both suicides and drug overdoses have overtaken vehicle deaths for the first time in U.S. history, to the point where now our life expectancy declined for 3 years. First time in 100 years. Last time our life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row was the Spanish flu of 1918. So, if you look at that and you say, wow, like, you actually have people killing themselves in record numbers, I mean, that's horrifying. And the drug overdose epidemic is happening at the highest levels in places that have been hit by automation. It's happening in West Virginia, it's happening in Ohio, it's happening in these Midwestern states that have lost a lot of their economic vitality. The labor force participation rate in the United States right now is 63%, close to a multi-decade low in the same levels as Ecuador and Costa Rica. Almost 1 out of 5 prime working age American men has not worked in a year. And that's right now in year 10 of an expansion, very rosy headline unemployment. There are these real undercurrents and also a real pervasive financial insecurity, where 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, 57% can't afford an unexpected $500 bill, and so they feel like there's not enough to go around, and then it gets very, very easy to generate tribalism and hostility towards immigrants and other groups. Now, how do you change this? It's very, very hard. But this idea of a dividend for all Americans actually originated with, like, you know, even earlier than this, but Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, called it the Citizens Dividend. Martin Luther King championed it in 1967, called it the Guaranteed Minimum Income. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists signed a study saying we should do this in America in the 60s and 70s. It even passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. This is in some ways a very conservative-friendly plan, because what conservatives hate are entitlement programs that have very negative incentives attached to them. What they like is people having money to do what they want. So the freedom dividend would put money into people's hands, and then it would make our children stronger and healthier. It would make us all mentally healthier. It would help millions of Americans manage the transition in this economy, just as AI is landing and we're going to start getting rid of more and more jobs. And the money circulates through our economy and just ends up increasing the number of jobs that people have in their communities in an accessible way. Now, if we don't make a move like this, it's going to be very, very hard in the face of really historic changes, because again, MIT, Bain, and McKinsey are all saying 20 to 30% of jobs. And when I dug into the numbers, I studied economics. We got rid of these 4 million manufacturing jobs in the Midwestern states primarily. How many people studied economics? So imagine that population if they start losing their jobs in large numbers. I'm going to suggest they're probably going to do worse than go home and kill themselves. They'll probably park their truck someplace they're not supposed to. And we're going to see science fiction level dystopian scenarios played out. And if you think I'm exaggerating, truckers protested 2 months ago in Indiana. They did something called the slow roll, which is they started driving their truck slowly on the highway. Like just 3 of them lined up and they started driving slowly at 45 miles an hour for an hour. And so then everyone on the highway was like, why is everyone going so slowly? No one could do anything about it. What were they protesting? They were protesting the digital monitoring of their driving time. How are they going to react when it's their livelihoods at stake? Their average income is $46,000 a year. For high school graduates, that's a very solid middle class job. What's their next best economic alternative going to be if the robot trucks start getting rid of those jobs in significant numbers? Oh, it's a rhetorical question. No one really knows. And there's a fantasy that we're somehow going to retrain truck drivers to become software engineers. How many of you all are software engineers? And then as soon as you actually start thinking about what that would mean, you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Why would we even think that's possible? And the reason why we're so insistent that it might be possible is that we feel like we need to somehow transform workers into something that the market wants, even when it's going to be nearly impossible. Only 8% of American jobs are in STEM fields. Trying to turn 92% of non-STEM workers into STEM workers is pretty ridiculous, if you think about it, particularly when those workers often, like the truckers, one joke I tell is they didn't like school 30 years ago. Like, why would they have learned to love school like driving a truck? So we have to start making bigger moves with the dividend, and so that's why I'm so passionate that the dividend is something that we're going to wind up with sooner or later. So the sooner we do it, the better off we'll be.
We got one more question over there.
Andrew, last question. Thank you for stepping up to the major political stage representing Chinese and all American too. What's your advice for the young man and young woman in this crowd for growing up in America and become a full citizen? Engaged citizen.
So I'm going to give the advice that I think will be the most applicable, is just to try and do something that makes you somewhat uncomfortable, not every day, but at least like every week for everyone. Because then you find that those uncomfortable behaviors get less uncomfortable, then you'll find yourself being able to do more and more, and that'll help you become an engaged citizen. You should. We are so extraordinary in some things, and I was joking with someone earlier today where they were like, I barely even started voting, and I remember when I was growing up, and it's like my parents, I don't know if they ever voted. I still don't know. And so having your heads up and trying to participate in the American process is super helpful, but I think it's even more helpful to just push yourself personally and do things that will make you uncomfortable at first, but then you'll just get better and better and stronger and stronger. And I do want to share with you all, many of you are here because some friend asked you, and you're like, Asian American political candidate, running for president, this is very exciting, I'm going to do what I can to support him, and I'm super appreciative. But I want to share with you all the bigger landscape. I can win the whole thing. I can win the whole thing. Right now, the internet has me at approximately 8% to win the whole thing. I'm approximately in 7th place. I'm in 7th place out of 21. No, really, it's not a bad place to be, because if you look at the people above me, like, you can kind of play out some of the things that, some of the things are probably not going to work out. So the guy named Nate Silver, who's very analytical about politics, said this. He said, Andrew Yang is polling at 3% nationwide, which I am. Andrew Yang has raised over $3 million in increments of only $20 each, which I have done. So thank you for donating more than $20. No, I know. You particularly don't. Thank you for bringing the average up. And then the third variable Nate had was no one has ever heard of Andrew Yang. And so he said these three numbers do not make any sense together. That someone should not be polling at 3% and raising millions of dollars with the lowest name recognition of anyone in the field. And so he said, according to my model, his model, we cannot discount the possibility that as more people find out about Andrew Yang, his campaign is just going to grow and grow and grow, and he's going to win the whole thing. And this is our chance. 25% of Americans are just like most of you, where they're what's called politically disengaged. If we get the politically disengaged Americans excited about my campaign, we can win the whole thing, because that 25% outnumbers the people that are participating in the Democratic primary, and that group is split among, let's call it 5 to 10 other candidates. Most Americans are not tuning in. I want you guys to delight in this, that when most Americans have no idea what's going on with the 2020 race yet. Just like many of you. So don't worry, you're not behind. What they're going to do is the first time they're going to find out about it is they're going to turn on the TV for the debates at the end of June. And you know what they're going to say? They're going to say, who's the Asian man standing next to Joe Biden? And then they're going to Google Asian man standing next to Joe Biden. Oh, my name is probably going to be on a graphic underneath. Google Andrew Yang. And then they're going to find an interview, they're going to watch it, and then we're just going to keep on growing. So this campaign, one of the reasons why Nate Silver said what he said is that no one knows what the ceiling of this campaign is. You can look at most of the other candidates, you kind of have a sense of what their ceiling is. Bernie Sanders, sky-high name recognition, a certain level of support. It's not like a lot of people are going to discover, like Bernie Sanders, over this next period of time. But a lot of people are going to discover Andrew Yang. So I want you all to know that this donation's not just a feel-good donation. We can make history together, and we can win this whole thing. I see the path ahead of me and of us. And this campaign is in a very similar place to where the Republican Party was in 2016. You guys remember this? If you don't remember this, I'll refresh your memory. 17 Republicans ran for president in 2016. Donald Trump declared a little bit later than this, and he was not the front runner. He was polling at 1 or 2% the day he declared. Who was the front runner? Does anyone remember?
Jeb Bush.
Jeb Bush, that's right. Jeb Bush was the front runner. He was going to be our president. And then what happened? Donald Trump ended up running the table with the other 16 candidates, in part because the Republican Party did not really have confidence in its own ideas. And so when Donald Trump said something like, hey, globalization, trade, bad for us, and the Republicans were like, horror, now he'll lose for sure. And then no one cared, and the voters were like, whatever. And then it's like, so I've been a Democrat for years, but I have to say the Democratic Party is in a very similar spot this time. There are 21 candidates, and no one has that much confidence in Democratic ideas anymore. The Democratic Party needs some new ideas.
Yes.
And so what's going to happen is the candidate with the new ideas, who's not a politician, is just going to come in, and the other candidates are going to seem kind of similar to each other, and I'm going to be the person that's dissimilar, and then people are going to gravitate to this campaign, and we're just going to grow the whole time, because our ideas are what the Democratic Party needs. So thank you, but know that this is not me running and it's like, oh, we'll feel good about this, and as long as he reaches a certain level. No, screw that. Let us win the whole thing. Am I right?
Yeah!
We do want to also let everybody know, speaking of donations, for our group together, we got $25,000 so far. I'm going to go down. The largest donation they got before is California, $25,000. And 2 days ago in Seattle, they had a 500 people dinner.
Yeah.
500 people dinner. They raised close to 44,000. But they spent close to $20,000 in food costs. So for net, we're very, very close to number one. So we're looking for more donations because we're Asians. We're always looking to be number one, right? You want to be number one, we want to be number one. So let's donate. There are signs inside. You can look it up. Andrew is going to sign books. Each book is $100. We have people set up. So looking for more donations. We'd love for you to donate more. Let's make us number one, okay? Let's make everybody number one, okay?